Sometimes the most incredible stories are hiding in plain sight. Today, we're looking at some old, handwritten student notes, but what's inside them is a story of faith, rebellion, and a revolution that totally reshaped medieval Europe.
Okay, so how do we get from scribbled notes to a full-blown revolution? Well, we're going to decode these lines of ink and turn them into a clear story about one of the most important and violent upheavals of the 15th century. Let's dive in.
All right, here's our roadmap. We're going to start by seeing what was going wrong in the kingdom. Then we'll meet the man who lit the fuse, watch the trial that fanned the flames, and then see how it all just erupted into a massive firestorm of revolution.
To really get why a revolution exploded, you first have to understand the crisis that made people so desperate for a change. See, this wasn't a happy kingdom. It was a kingdom right on the brink. So, think about it like this. Under Emperor Charles IV, Prague was the center of the universe, a real golden age. But that good time was super fragile. When his son Wenceslas IV took over, he basically inherited a kingdom that was starting to fall apart at the seams.
And here we can see the perfect storm brewing. The notes mention a horrible plague, an economic crisis with silver, and crime going through the roof. Now, when people are suffering that much, and they look over and see a church that's just getting richer and more powerful, well, that's the perfect breeding ground for some really radical ideas. Every perfect storm needs a lightning rod. And into all of this chaos and frustration stepped a preacher who would give a voice to all that anger, a guy named Jan Hus.
Now, Hus wasn't just some guy yelling on the street corner. He was a master at the university in Prague, a real intellectual powerhouse, and he was incredibly charismatic. When he spoke, everybody listened, from the poorest person in the city to the most powerful nobles.
And he wasn't just making this stuff up out of thin air. As our source notes tell us, he was hugely inspired by an English reformer, John Wycliffe, who had made similar arguments that the church had just become way too rich and powerful. Husk took those ideas and really amplified them in Bohemia. And this right here, this is the absolute heart of the conflict. Huss was out there preaching that the church was obsessed with money and power. He went after the selling of indulgences, the idea that you could pay to have your sins forgiven. This was a direct shot at the church's authority, and maybe more importantly, its bank account. You just knew this couldn't go on forever, right? This clash between Huss and the church was bound to have a major showdown, and it all came to a head at this huge church meeting called the Council of Constance. So Huss actually traveled to this council thinking he was going to get a fair debate. He even had a letter guaranteeing his safety from Sigismund, the future Holy Roman Emperor. But that promise, it was broken. As soon as he got there, he was arrested, thrown in prison, and put on trial as a heretic.
Pay attention to this number, 150. That's how many powerful nobles from Bohemia and Moravia signed a formal protest demanding his release. This just goes to show you Huss wasn't some fringe lunatic. He had serious backing from the most powerful people in his country. But it didn't matter. The protest did nothing. The council declared him a heretic and, well, they had him executed. For his followers back home, this wasn't just the death of a man. It was the ultimate betrayal. It was basically a declaration of war. So when the news got back to Bohemia that their hero had been executed, the grief and the rage just boiled over. The spark from that fire in Constance had just landed in a giant powder keg. And this is one of those wild moments in history. 4 years later, a furious mob of Huss's followers storms the town hall in Prague and literally throws the city councilors out the windows. This event, known as the First Defenestration of Prague, wasn't just a riot, it was the point of no return. Now, the revolution wasn't just one big unified group. As the notes show, you had different factions, like the super radical Taborites. But what united them was their common cause. And they had these absolutely brilliant military leaders, especially a general named Jan Žižka. So what were they actually fighting for? This wasn't just mindless rage. The Hussites came up with a very clear list of demands that became the bedrock of their whole revolution. And here they are, the 4 Articles of Prague. Think of it as their manifesto. Number 1, freedom to preach. 2, communion for everyone, both bread and wine, not just for priests. 3, the church had to give up its wealth and political power. And 4, equal justice for everyone, rich or poor. I mean, every single one of these was a radical challenge to the medieval world. And let me tell you, they were ready to die for these articles. Led by the tactical genius Jan Žižka, the Hussite armies, often just peasants, used incredible new tactics to defeat crusade after crusade sent by the Pope and the Emperor to destroy them. And this right here, this was the ultimate political move. The Hussites held their own national assembly, and they officially deposed Sigismund, the man they blamed for Huss's death. They basically said, "You are not our king," and decided to go their own way. So this whole story, pulled right from these notes, shows us how a call for change, when it's met with force instead of conversation, can explode into a war that lasts for decades. And it leaves you with this big question that still echoes today. What's that tipping point? When does a belief stop being just a belief and become a revolution?